Her brother sent her to a rival pack, never knowing the Alpha King had been searching for her for years. Lena Vaskov left with one bag. Not because she was a light packer, because Riven had given her 30 minutes, and she had used 27 of them sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor, doing the math on what this meant, and finding, at the end of all that math, nothing that added up to anything kind. She packed the gray sweater, the one with the fraying cuff she kept meaning to fix, 3 pairs of socks, her charger, the small notebook she had never once written in but carried everywhere because she kept thinking she might become the sort of person who did. A photograph she folded in half before she tucked it in, so only the background showed. Pale grass, a fence post, the edge of a sky that had been a good sky, once, on a day that no longer belonged to her. She did not pack the blue dress her mother had left her. Riven was in the hallway when she came out. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his face doing the thing it always did, composed, almost careful, like a man who had already decided something difficult and was now simply waiting for the paperwork to catch up. "It's a good arrangement," he said. Lena looked at him for a long time. "Okay," she said. She walked past him and down the stairs and through the front door, and she did not look back. This was not bravery. She had stopped looking back at things a long time ago. There was nothing behind her that ever looked different the second time. The Jeep smelled like pine air freshener and old leather. 2 of Riven's betas sat in the front. She didn't know their names. She had lived inside her brother's pack for 6 years, and she still didn't know their names, and this had once bothered her, the way a splinter bothers you, small and specific, and now it didn't even bother her that it didn't bother her anymore. The pine air freshener had a little tree shape. She watched it swing. 3 hours. 2 territory checkpoints. 1 long stretch of road where the sky opened up so wide and flat that she had to look down because something about all that empty space made her chest do something she wasn't prepared to deal with, in the back of a Jeep with 2 men whose names she didn't know. The Draveth compound came up on the horizon, like it had always been there, and had simply been waiting for someone to notice. Stone walls, high gates, trees inside the perimeter that were older than anything she'd ever stood next to. She craned her neck to look at them through the window, and caught herself doing it, and stopped. The gate opened. She picked up her bag. He wasn't supposed to be in the yard. Cale Draveth had a schedule. The schedule existed because things without schedules had a tendency to go wrong in ways that affected large numbers of people, and he had spent enough time cleaning up the aftermath of things going wrong that he had built a life around the meticulous prevention of it. 7 in the morning, East Wing briefing. 8, sparring. 9, correspondence. The schedule said nothing about standing in the yard at 3 in the afternoon watching a rusted Jeep roll through the gates. He had come outside because Soren had mentioned something about a supply delivery and he had wanted to. It didn't matter why, he was in the yard. That was the fact. The Jeep stopped, the door opened. A girl got out with 1 bag over her shoulder and she stood in the afternoon light for exactly 2 seconds while she got her bearings. Head up, eyes sweeping the compound with the practiced, quiet efficiency of someone who had learned early to assess a room before committing to it. And Cale felt the thing in his chest that had been a half-healed wound for 7 years pull tight like a rope with too much weight on it. He knew her. He knew her before he knew her face, before she turned and her eyes found the compound and swept past him without stopping because she didn't know to look. He knew the shape of her standing, the way she held the bag strap with 2 fingers loose, casual, like she could drop it and run if she needed to. He knew the tension in her shoulders that was not tension actually, was just the way she held herself, like she was always very slightly braced. 7 years. He had been looking for 7 years, and she had arrived in a rusted Jeep from her brother's pack on a Tuesday afternoon, and she didn't even know to look at him. Soren appeared at his elbow, said something. Cale heard the words and did not process them. "Send someone to help her with her room," he said. He went inside. He found a door frame in the east corridor and held onto it until the wood gave and his hand stopped shaking. Then he stood in the hall for a while and looked at what he'd done to the wood and breathed. 7 years. He had thought, at some point in the last 7 years, that when this moment came, if this moment came, he would know what to do with it. He was the Alpha King. He always knew what to do with things. He had built his entire life around knowing what to do with things. His hands were still not entirely steady. He went to his study, sat down, and stared at the wall for 45 minutes doing absolutely nothing. They gave her a room in the West Wing. It was a good room. That was the thing about it that unsettled her. It was a genuinely good room, with a window that looked out over the old trees she'd noticed from the Jeep, and a bed that was soft, in the specific way that good beds are, where you sit on the edge and your body immediately starts making plans you haven't authorized yet. There was a small desk, a lamp with a warm bulb, a rug that was probably old and was definitely beautiful in the way that old things sometimes are. She stood in the middle of it and looked around. She put her bag on the desk. She didn't unpack it. A girl named Petra came to show her where things were: the dining hall, the training ground, the library, the east and west gates, and which one was which, and why it mattered. Petra was small and quick and talked with her hands and did not treat Lena like a package that had been delivered, which was such a relief that Lena found herself being slightly warmer than she'd intended, because she'd intended to be nothing at all, just polite and blank and minimal, the way she had learned to be in spaces where she didn't know the rules yet. "Dinner's at 7, Petra said. "Kale usually eats with the pack. Not always. She paused, selected a word with visible care. "He has a lot going on." "Sure," said Lena. She went to dinner at 7. She sat at the end of the long table and put food on her plate and ate it, and looked at her plate, and looked at the table, and looked everywhere, except at the head of the table, where the Alpha King of the Dravith pack ate his dinner in the particular quiet of a very large, very controlled man who was pretending, very effectively, not to be aware that she was in the room. She noticed anyway. The stillness was too deliberate. The way he didn't look at her was too complete. She ate her food and said nothing, and went back to her room and sat on her bed and looked at her unpacked bag until she was tired enough to sleep. She didn't unpack the bag. 3 days passed. She learned the compound the way she learned most spaces, slowly, quietly, by walking the same corridors at the same times until the people in them stopped noticing her, and then she started noticing them. The kitchen staff who argued every morning about whose turn it was to do the heavy pots. The 2 young betas who trained together in the yard at dawn and competed with such fervent seriousness that she had to press her mouth together not to smile. An old man called Dav who sat by the east gate every afternoon with a book he never seemed to actually read, just held open at the same page. The compound was not what she had expected. She wasn't sure, something colder, something that felt more like what her brother's pack felt like, which was organized and efficient and faintly, constantly, like standing next to a very loud machine whose function you didn't quite understand. The Dravith compound felt like something that had been running a long time and knew how to do it, like a place that had decided to be itself and had been being itself long enough that it had stopped feeling like a decision. She walked past the cracked doorframe in the east corridor on her second day. She looked at it. The wood had splintered inward, which meant the force had come from the outside. Someone had gripped it hard enough to crack it. She thought about that and then stopped thinking about it, because she was not here to think about things like that. Soren found her on the 4th day. He was older than she'd expected, late 40s, with gray at his temples, and the kind of face that had been through enough things that it had stopped trying to look like it hadn't. He sat next to her on the bench outside the library where she was eating an apple because she had missed the lunch hour by 20 minutes, and this was the snack situation available to her, and he said nothing for a while. She finished the apple. She was not uncomfortable with silence. She had a lot of practice with silence. "You don't know why you're here," he said. "Not a question. Hostage exchange," she said. "Border arrangement. Riven's standard move when he needs goodwill he hasn't actually earned." Soren looked at the trees. That's one way to describe it. She looked at him. He had the manner of a man who was choosing his words the way you choose which wire to cut, when you're not entirely sure what happens if you get it wrong. "The Alpha King," he started, stopped. 7 years ago there was a border summit. The Vaskov pack and the Dravith pack. Neutral ground, 3 days. Trade terms. He paused. "You were there." Something in her went very still. I was 17, she said. I was there for the first day. Riven sent me back early. He said I wasn't. She stopped. He said there wasn't a reason for me to be there. There was a reason. Soren's voice was careful, steady, like a man walking across ice he knows the weight of. You crossed paths with the Alpha King. You were there maybe 3 hours total. And he, another pause, he knew. The bond. He felt it. The apple core was in her hand. She looked at it. He spent the next 7 years looking for you, Soren said. Every territory in range, every summit, every trade meeting, every exchange he could justify attending. He didn't know your name. He knew what you looked like. He knew the way you smelled, which is, in our world, that's everything. That's more than enough. He exhaled. And your brother sent you here in a jeep as a political arrangement. The apple core. She was looking at the apple core. Did my brother know? She said. Her voice came out flat and level. This was not composure. This was the sound of a person sitting on something enormous and keeping very still so it didn't shift. Soren didn't answer, which was of course the answer. She stood up. She put the apple core in the bin beside the bench. She said, "Thank you for telling me," in a voice that didn't belong to her at all, some very calm, very distant version of her that had apparently taken over the controls. And she went back to her room and sat on the floor next to her bed with her back against the mattress and her knees up. She sat like that for a long time. The grief was too much. Too big. Too many layers to it. Riven had known. Riven had sat across from her in the hallway with his arms crossed and his careful face and his "it's a good arrangement," and he had known, for 7 years, that there was a man searching for her, and he had not told her, and then he had put her in a jeep and delivered her like. She reached for the anger. It came up warm and immediate and familiar, the way it always did, sweet in the specific way that only useful things are sweet. The anger was not the feeling. The anger was the lid she put on the feeling, so she could stand up and function and decide what she was going to do with this information, instead of sitting on the floor until the information flattened her entirely. She stood up. She was going to find him. She found him on the roof. She didn't know the roof was accessible until she followed the east corridor staircase all the way up and found the door propped open with a stone. She went through it and came out into the late evening air, and he was standing at the far edge with his back to her, looking out over the trees. She had come up here to be furious at someone, to direct the anger somewhere that could absorb it. She had come up here ready for a man who would be cold or formal, or would explain the political necessities in the measured tone of someone who had never once in his life been handed over to strangers in a jeep. He turned around when he heard her. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been afraid to want for a very long time, and have now been given, and cannot quite make your face behave about it. She had not expected that. The look. The complete absence of composure in it. Just for a second, before he pulled it back and settled his face into something steadier. Soren told me, she said. I know, he said. You've been looking for me. Yes. For 7 years. Yes. She walked toward him. Not all the way. Halfway. Then stopped. Because she needed to still be able to see his face clearly, and she needed some air between them while she did this. My brother knew, she said. I believe so. I don't. She stopped, started over. He told me I wasn't needed at the summit, that there was no reason for me to be there. He came and got me himself, drove me back. She heard the thing in her own voice that she didn't want there, the specific register of someone who has just understood something they have been carefully not understanding for years. I was 17. I thought he was looking out for me. Riven does that. He does it in a way that looks like something good. It feels like something you should be grateful for. Kale was quiet. He was afraid of you, he said, of what you carry. He would have known it the moment it happened at the summit, because the people around you would have felt it, the pull toward you that happens when a bond activates. He sent you home before anyone could put it together, before I could get your name. What do I carry? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something old, something that doesn't fit the classification Riven gave you. He paused. You're not Omega, Lena. She had been called Omega since she was 15. The lowest classification in her brother's pack, the least, the one who needed managing and arranging and delivering. She looked at him. "What am I?" she asked. He said it in 2 words, quiet and certain, and she felt it land in her chest like a key in a lock she hadn't known she was carrying. She didn't say anything for a while. He didn't push her to. They stood on the roof until the light went the way it goes in the evening, sideways and gold, and the trees below them went dark at the roots, while the top still held some color. She was not comfortable. She was not okay. But there was something about the specific quality of his silence, the way he didn't try to fill it, didn't try to reassure her, didn't offer her a version of this that was easier to swallow, that made the space between them feel less like a gap and more like something she could breathe in. She went back to her room when it was dark. She didn't unpack her bag, but she moved it from the desk to the floor beside the bed. That was something. The pack run happened 11 days after she arrived, on a Thursday, at dusk. Petra had mentioned it in passing. Thursdays, sometimes, if the weather was right, and the Alpha King wasn't buried in meetings. A pack run through the East Woods, optional for everyone, except it wasn't really optional, because no one actually skipped it unless they were injured or ill, because something about running together in the dark with your whole pack around you did something to a person that nothing else quite managed. Lena went. She went because she hadn't run properly in 6 years. Riven's pack didn't do this, or if they did, she had never been included, which was the same thing as them not doing it as far as her experience was concerned. And she went because she was not going to let herself become someone who stayed in a room with an unpacked bag when there was still outside. She found a place at the edge of the group, stayed close to the trees. The others were loosely clustered around Kale at the front, easy with each other, in the way of people who have been doing this together long enough that they don't have to think about it. They started running, and something happened that she was not prepared for. The thing that Kale had told her she carried, she felt it wake up. It came from under her ribs, which was where it apparently lived, and it spread outward through her legs and her arms and the top of her skull like something that had been pressed down for a very long time had just been given room. She ran, and the ground was dark and soft under her feet, and the trees were a blur on either side, and the pack was around her. Not close, not pressing, just around, the way a perimeter is around a thing. And the thing under her ribs kept spreading, and it was not painful. It was the opposite of painful. It was the opposite of everything she had thought she was. She heard him stop running before she saw him. The sense of him went still somewhere off to her left, and she knew, without knowing how she knew, that he was standing still in the dark about 40 meters away, and that something was happening in his chest that was the mirror of what was happening in hers. She heard him running toward her. She stood in the dark between 2 enormous trees, and she waited, and he came out of the shadows running the way large things run when they have been very controlled for a very long time and are no longer being controlled, and he stopped 3 feet from her. They looked at each other. The thing in her chest did not calm down. She hadn't expected it to. "Okay," she said, out loud, to no one in particular. Kale said nothing. He was doing the thing she had noticed he did when he was close to something he couldn't afford to fumble, going very still, very careful, like a man who has spent years running towards something and has now arrived and is terrified of what his hands might do wrong in the dark. The pack ran on around them, gave them space without making it obvious they were giving space. The pack, she was starting to understand, was very good at things like that. She walked home. He walked next to her, not touching, 2 feet between them in the dark, all the way back to the compound. She went to her room. She sat on the bed. She unpacked her bag. She didn't make a decision about it. Her hands just started doing it. The gray sweater, the socks, the charger, the notebook. She put things in drawers. She hung the sweater on the hook behind the door. She took out the folded photograph and looked at it for a long time. Then she put it on the desk, unfolded. Pale grass, a fence post, the edge of a good sky. She went to sleep. Riven arrived on a Thursday, 3 weeks after she did. He came under a truce flag, which meant he couldn't be turned away, and he came with 2 betas and a legal argument, and the specific smile he used when he was certain he had already won a thing. Lena watched him come through the gate from the window of the library. She put her book down. She went to the meeting room where they'd set him up, because Cale had insisted on a proper setting, neutral table, no advantage, and she walked in and sat down across from her brother, and put her hands flat on the table in front of her, and looked at him. He smiled at her. "You look well. I know what you did," she said. The smile didn't move. "The arrangement was entirely above board. I can show you I know," she said, "what you did." Something crossed his face. Very fast. Gone before she could name it, except she'd been watching her brother's face for 24 years, and she could name it. The specific flicker of someone whose prepared speech has just been rendered unnecessary. "You were afraid of it," she said. "What I am. You've known since the summit, and you didn't tell me, and then you put me in a jeep, because getting rid of it seemed easier than explaining it." "I was looking out for you," Riven said. "I always have been. The Draveth pack is... Cale Draveth is not someone you want attached to. He's powerful, and he's political, and the bond would have complicated." "Stop," she said. He stopped. "I believed you for a long time," she said. "The looking out for me. I thought that was what it was." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "I need you to take your betas, and your truce flag, and your legal argument, and go home." "Lena." His voice shifted, softer, the voice she had always. "You don't have to stay here. That's the point. Whatever agreement Riven made, you're not. You have options. You're my sister." "I know I'm your sister," she said. She stood up. She walked to the door, and she opened it, and on the other side of it was the corridor, and at the end of the corridor was the compound she had been learning for 3 weeks. The library, the yard, the old trees, the kitchen argument about heavy pots, the cracked door frame, the roof, and she stepped through. She heard Riven say her name behind her. She kept walking. Cale was in the yard when she came out. He had known Riven was here. Of course he had. He was standing in the afternoon light, with his hands in his pockets, and his face doing the thing that she had learned, in 3 weeks, was not coldness but something more specific. The controlled stillness of a man who has decided not to make a decision until someone else has had the chance to make theirs first. She stopped in front of him. "He's leaving," she said. Something in Cale's face shifted, small, controlled, but she saw it. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know. You could have gone with him. The truce terms would have allowed—" "I know," she said. "I didn't want to." She said it like it was simple. Because it was. It had taken her a while to find the simplicity of it under everything else, but she had found it. She didn't want to go. She had never not wanted to go somewhere before. There had never been a somewhere that held her like this. Not loudly, not with drama, just with the quiet insistence of a place that had been waiting and had made room. Cale looked at her for a long time. He did not ask her to stay. He did not say he was glad. He was, she had come to understand, not a man who said the large things easily or out loud. The large things happened in his hands, in the cracked door frame and the careful distance on the walk home through the dark, and the way he had turned around on that roof and let his face do the thing it did before he caught it. "Soren made coffee," he said. "Okay," she said. They went inside. She waited 2 more weeks to go to him. Not cruelty, not games. She needed to know. She needed to know if what she felt when she was around him was the bond, which was real and old and did not consult her preferences, or if it was him. Specifically, this particular man in this particular corridor who went still when she came into rooms and spoke in half sentences when something mattered and had spent 7 years looking for a girl he'd known for 3 hours. She watched him. He let her watch him. She wasn't sure if he knew she was doing it. She suspected he knew. She watched him at dinner, where he listened more than he spoke, and when he spoke people leaned in without deciding to. She watched him with the young betas who trained in the yard at dawn, who were loud and competitive, and whose feelings he managed with a patience that was not performative, a patience that came from somewhere real, from some understanding of what it cost a person to be young and uncertain and trying very hard. She watched him read. She watched him work. She watched him stand at the east gate one morning, talking to old Dav, the man with the book, and she saw Dav laugh at something Kale said, and she saw Kale's face when he heard the laugh, the way it softened without him choosing to soften it. On the 14th day, at 9 in the evening, she knocked on the door of his study. He said, "Come in." She came in. He was at his desk with papers spread out and a coffee going cold at his elbow, and he looked at her the way he always looked at her, like he was very glad she was there, and was being very disciplined about not making that into a problem she had to solve. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Okay," he said. "I've been watching you," she said, "trying to figure out if this is the bond or if this is you. If I would want this, if I hadn't been told I was supposed to want it." He didn't say anything. "And I think," she said, "that you would be difficult, in the way that things worth doing are difficult. I think you would be the kind of person I would have to fight to understand, and who would have to fight to understand me, and I think we would probably both win that fight. And I think I want that." The papers on his desk rustled in some small draft from somewhere. "I'm not choosing this because I'm supposed to," she said. "I need you to know that. I'm choosing this because I've spent 2 weeks looking at you and you are—" She stopped, tried again. "You are the most specific person I have ever seen. You are all the way yourself. I've never met anyone who was all the way themselves." She put her hands in her pockets. "So, that's what I'm choosing. You, specifically." Kale stood up. He was slow about it, like he was doing the math on whether this was real, running through it once more, because he had run through it 1,000 times in 7 years, and he had learned what it felt like to be wrong, to get to the end of a lead and find no one there. He crossed the room. He stopped in front of her. His hands came up and he held her face very carefully, like something that might move if he wasn't paying attention, and he looked at her for a long time without saying anything. "Okay," he said finally. His voice was not entirely steady. This was the first time she had ever heard his voice not entirely steady, and it undid her more thoroughly than anything that had come before it, because it meant this: her, here, choosing him, was doing to him what his 7 years of looking had been doing quietly to her ever since Soren told her about it. "Okay," she said back. She called Riven 3 days later. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he had been expecting this and had been anxious about it, because Riven was not a man who picked up on the second ring if he had any choice in the matter. "Lena," he said. "I'm staying," she said. "I wanted to tell you myself, not through channels." A pause. "This isn't what I know," she said. "I know it's not what you planned. I know you thought you were. I know what you thought." She exhaled. "I'm not going to do the thing where I list all the ways you were wrong. You know. I think you've known for a while." Silence on the line. "I'm going to need some time," she said, "before I'm ready to, before we're okay. That's honest, and I think you deserve honest from me more than you deserve comfortable." "Yeah," said Riven. His voice was strange. Smaller than usual. The voice of someone being exact with words they have never said in this order before. "Yeah, okay." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment. Outside the window, the old trees moved in a small wind. She watched them. Then she went to find Kale, because dinner was in an hour, and she had learned in the last 3 weeks that she was, apparently, the kind of person who liked eating in a room full of people who knew each other well, which was a thing she had not known about herself before, and was now learning with the same deliberate attention she gave to everything she decided was worth understanding. She walked down the east corridor. She stopped at the cracked door frame. She put her hand on the split wood. She stood there for a moment, feeling the rough grain under her palm, the record of one night 3 weeks ago when a very controlled man had lost control of his hands because she had walked through a gate. She pressed her palm flat against it. Then she walked to dinner. The photograph stayed on the desk. Pale grass, a fence post, a good sky. She had looked at it so many times in her life with a feeling she couldn't name, a specific ache that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite longing, but lived in the neighborhood of both. A feeling like something had happened, once, that she hadn't been allowed to keep. She understood it now. The sky in the photograph was the sky over the border summit. She had taken it in the 3 hours she was there. 17 years old, with a disposable camera someone had left at the house, standing on the edge of the neutral ground before Riven had come to get her. She had not known what she was photographing. She had just looked up at the sky and thought, "This is a good sky. I want to keep it," and she had. Spring came. She learned the North Gate. The one Petra had told her mattered but hadn't explained. It mattered because it opened onto a ridge that looked out over the whole valley, 3 territories visible on a clear day, the kind of view that made the world feel sized correctly for the first time. She went up there on a Sunday morning with coffee, and sat on the flat rock at the top, and looked at the 3 territories for a long time. Kale came up behind her. She heard him on the path. He was not trying to be quiet. He sat down next to her on the rock. He had his own coffee. He had brought an extra because he had known she would be here, and had known she would be sitting long enough that she'd want one. She took the extra coffee without comment. They sat. 3 territories. Clear morning. A good sky. "I'm staying," she said, not because it needed saying, but because she liked saying it, because it was still new enough that she liked the way it felt in her mouth, the simplicity of it, the way it felt nothing like resignation and everything like arrival. "I know," he said. "Just saying it," she said. "I heard you," he said. She looked at him, the specific shape of him in the morning light, the way he sat, unhurried, like a man who had nowhere else he needed to be, because here was where he needed to be, the way his hands curled around his coffee cup. She realized, going to have to learn this face for the rest of her life. She found, sitting on that rock on that Sunday morning, with the valley spread out before her and his shoulder warm near hers, and the coffee exactly the right temperature, that she was entirely prepared to do that. The old trees below the ridge caught a small wind and moved. She watched them, the same way she had watched them from her window on that first night, from the bed she hadn't unpacked for, in the room she hadn't meant to stay in. They looked the same. She was not the same. She drank her coffee, and the morning held them there on that rock, on that ridge, with 3 territories visible and a sky that was, by any measure, a very good sky. She didn't photograph it. She didn't need to. This one she was keeping differently.